All right, everyone, welcome to the very first Crawford AP review. Today, we are going to cover the exam itself, what it's going to look like, and then we are going to talk about Unit 1. Just remember, this is to supplement the studying that you are doing. So please make sure, guys, you are still working on all those strategies and things that I've given you. Make sure you're looking at your AMSCO. Make sure you're using Albert IO to use those practice test questions. And just remember, you've got this a little bit every day and you are going to do great. So first, let's talk through the exam itself. We've covered this a bunch, but I just want to make sure again you remember. So the multiple choice, you're going to get all of this on the screen as your very first option. So you're going to get 55 questions in 55 minutes. You are going to have 40% of this as your total grade. Make sure you answer them all, guys. It's going to be marked wrong if it's blank. So if you find you have a minute left, go through, pick a letter and put it in. But you've practiced this. All of you have practiced this all year. You know how to do 55 questions in 55 minutes. What are these going to be doing? They're going to be based on maps, charts, cartoons, excerpts. It's going to be stimulus based. 2 to 5 questions per stimulus. Also, then they're going to pick that up and they're going to give you right away the short answer. It's going to be 3 questions in 40 minutes, and that's going to be 20% of your grade. It's going to be question 1 is going to be based on that secondary source. Question 2 is going to be based on some sort of primary source. Sometimes they'll give you 2 secondary sources or 2 primary sources where you might need to compare or contrast those views. Sometimes it's a single source where you're talking about it. And then question 3, you're going to get a choice. There will be no stimulus. So this is very much like that Great Depression SAQ that I gave you recently that will show you just questions, 3 questions. Remember, spend about 12 minutes per question. I've been giving you 13 minutes and 20 seconds per question, but we only have 1 per test. So this time you're going to have 3. So spend about 12 minutes per question. That will give you 4 minutes to review. And do not forget your ACE strategy. Your ACE strategy is you are going to answer it, cite an example, and then explain that example. You're going to do that for question 1A, 3 sentences, question 1B, 3 sentences, question 1C, 3 sentences, giving you about 9 sentences a question times 3. So you're going to have about 27 total sentences you write in 40 minutes. You can absolutely do that. Then we're going to take a look at that DBQ, guys. Again, we've been practicing these. You know how to analyze documents. You know how to look at the contextualization. You know how to look at the thesis. You know how to do outside information. Don't forget the format we discussed. First paragraph should have contextualization, 3 to 5 sentences, then your thesis point, 1 to 3 sentences, depending on how you write your thesis. Then you are going to use the documents to support your argument. Remember, you have to have an argument in your thesis. You must take a position. You must take a side, and you're going to use the evidence in the DBQ, the evidence given to you, to make that argument. And you're going to use all 7 documents, guys. You're going to do all 7 in case you mess one up. And then you are going to make sure you have some kind of outside information that supports your argument. If you do those, you already have a 5 out of 7. And then you're going to keep going, and you are going to hip it. Historical context, intended audience, point of view, or purpose. You're going to hip at least 3 of those 7 documents correctly. And then that takes you to the complexity point. And we've talked about that. And, we know that's difficult, but there are different ways you can approach complexity. Do not forget, if they ask you to do similarities of something, do similarities and differences. If they ask you for the cause of something, do the cause and effects. Or talk about how the documents interweave with one another. In your first paragraph, 1, 2, and 3 documents say this, but that really goes against what 4 and 5 say, and this is why, and this is what 4 and 5 say, and this is why they would say that. Play the documents off of one another for that complexity. You are trying to show that you understand the issue deeply and richly, not just this is history, it's black and white. But no, there's subtleties, there's nuances, there's different ways to approach it. And then we have that long essay question. Remember, this is DBQ light. That's all it is. You just don't have documents. You're going to do the exact same thing you did with the DBQ. You're going to have contextualization first, then thesis in your first paragraph. You are then going to find historical examples out of your brain that are specific to the argument that you made. So, pick an argument that you remember. Now you get a choice of up to, there's 3 questions. You only have to pick one of them. You're only going to pick one of them. And so you get to pick the one you know the best. And then you're going to make arguments from your brain, things that you could think of, historically specific examples. The rubric is clear. It says examples, it doesn't say how many. So we argue that that's 2 examples or more. I would always argue do some more just in case you mess up one of those examples. As long as you give specific examples that support your argument and you've done contextualization and you've had a thesis, that's a 4 out of 6 already. But you are going to push it. And what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that you are going to argue your essay in a way that is structured. You're going to either use comparison where you can compare and contrast examples. You're going to use cause and effect for examples. You're going to explain the continuity or change of the examples. You're not doing all of those historical reasoning skills. You're picking one, and that's how you're going to frame your essay. And then complexity is exactly the same as it was in that thesis. I mean, in that DBQ. So go ahead and do it that way. Now we're going to look at exam weighting. Take a look. The period we're going to cover today only covers 4 to 6% of your test. It's not a heavy weighting. The next period is 6 to 8. Drop on down to period 9. You can see that's only 4 to 6. So you can see the main meat and potatoes, guys, of this course lies in units 3 through units 8. Now, I've had kids before say, Ms. Crawford, it didn't feel like that, unit 6 was 10 to 17%. I felt like there was no questions on that. And I felt like there was 80% of the tests fell on unit 5. That's just how you're going to feel, but College Board is very specific about their weighting, and understand it also brings into it the DBQ, the LAQ, the SAQ, ones you don't pick to answer. So keep that in mind. It is weighted fairly, but that's why it's important. You can see you got to know your history. Make sure you know it all. So let's jump right in today. We're going to talk first about period 1. Period 1 is all about contact, commerce, and competing philosophies. And we're going to look at the early contact with the New World. Why these dates, 1491 to 1607. 1491 is obviously what we see as, pre-Columbian society. It's right before Christopher Columbus arrives on the scene, and up to 1607 is the founding of Jamestown, which we will pick up in Unit 2. I have a timeline for you. I'm not going to go over it every day in these timelines. I give it to you so that you can take a look at it and make sure you understand these ideas. These are things that I'm aware of. Oh yeah, I know these people. Every once in a while, though, I will pull out some things in the timeline that I feel are super important and make sure that we just focus on. So drop down to that 1493 doctrine of discovery. This is where Pope Alexander VI issued his Inter Caetera. It's a papal bull granting significant lands to Spain at the expense of Portugal and the New World's ambition. The bull, known as the Doctrine of Discovery, states that any land not inhabited by Christians is available to be discovered. Well, here we go. That is the example right there of why the Catholics felt that they were able to come in and take this land from the people that already lived there. They felt that they needed to care for the souls of the people there and deal with the barbarian nations that have to be taught faith. So this helps to make the argument as to why the Spanish feel that they can do what they did here. Now let's take a look at these Native American cultures. You can see I've drawn lots of circles and given you lots of lines because I really want you to kind of make sure you're paying attention to some of the places that are on this map, okay? You can see first, Native Americans, there's lots of arguments as to how they got to the New World. The most common is that they came across the Bering Strait about 10,000 years before Columbus. There's been other things that people have discussed. Some people argue that there's been ocean-going canoes that came from Micronesia, and that's how they arrived. Others have argued that it came across the Atlantic Ocean. I've seen arguments about that. But for right now, what's most accepted is probably the Bering Strait, and that's the best that we have. The one of the most important things is to understand these are diverse groups of people. They are very diverse. Not everyone lives in a teepee, guys. You have those coastal regions that are fishing communities. You have other places that build cities. You have some places live in longhouses. You have some people that farm. You have some people that fish. You have some people that hunt or gather. It is all complex and different the way that they live. So just to give you some examples, I want to give you a couple exemplars. So if you have an essay or a short answer question where you have to compare and contrast groups, I want to make sure you have some good, solid examples. So in the Southwest, we have the Pueblo. They grow corn, maize that spread north from Mexico. Okay. Why is that important? It allows their populations to grow large because they're able to feed them. They have advanced irrigation systems that allow them to divert water, and they live in clay brick kind of housing or those cliff dwellings. Then let's move into the Great Basin and the Great Plains regions. These groups are dominated by the Sioux, especially the Lakota Sioux. They led a nomadic lifestyle. Buffalo hunting was critical to their lives. They're hunter gatherers. They live in kinship bands. Then moving to the Pacific coast, they develop permanent settlements that have an abundance of fish and small game. The Chamush people are a great example there. Chumash people. Nearly about 1,000 people live up through that region, and they are developing regional trade groups. So they live in groups of nearly 1,000. Then let's head to the Mississippi Valley. That's that big kind of middle circle straight through. They are farmers. There's rich soil there, which we're going to see when the colonists push west. That's rich soil. And they will trade up and down the Mississippi rivers. And the Hopewell are a great example of a Native American groups that live there. Cahokia is their largest city of all. It's the largest city in North America at this time, except for when we, go into maybe the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayas. So when we talk about what is America, Cahokia is the largest city. Then look at the Atlantic coast, the Northeast, specifically that's the Iroquois. Notice the map. Who is going to experience first contact with the natives? It is going to be the Iroquois. They are a mixture of agriculture and hunter-gatherer society and live in permanent villages. They are later going to form the Iroquois Confederacy, and they are going to be people that plant amazing crops, live in these permanent settlements, live communally among these long houses, and they are going to be influenced and have impact with the French, with the Dutch, with the English. Then we have the Aztecs in Mexico. They have floating agriculture in the middle of their lake, Lake Texaco. We also have the Mayans and the Incans, and all three of them grow maize, and that really helps them to have large populations. One of the things that unite them, if you're looking for something that's kind of a continuity or a similarity between them, is that they have a belief that non-human things, plants, animals, things like that possess a spiritual essence. We call this animism, and this is their religious ideology. And this is very, very different from the Europeans, and so it's going to set the stage for conflict. When we look at these Native American cultures, I want to draw your eyes to that map. Please take a good look at that. You can see this is yet another example of why they are diverse. The way that they live is very diverse. They have complex societies that adapt and transform their environment, and they live based on what works for them. Some of those coastal regions you can see are really big on fishing. Others are big on hunting. Some are really big on agriculture, and it really depends on what their environment allows them to do. In the Arctic, we have the Inuit, they're fishers. In the Northeast, they focus on the Three Sisters method of crops. They grow corn, squash, and beans. Okay, but they're not always, best friends. You'll see warfare amongst these groups. The Algonquin and the Iroquois, for instance, are known to fight. These Iroquois, these 5 nations of Iroquois, are going to build a confederation, and we are going to talk about them in a later unit. In the Southwest, we have the Hopi. In the Southeast, we have the Mississippian, who are those large mound builders we discussed. Again, remember Cahokia, right outside of St. Louis. They have many different languages. They have many different cultures. There's over 150 different distinct ethnic groups. And we, really have to understand there's a lot of differences amongst these groups. They are not united in their belief system. Each tribal group interacts differently with its environment. So while Native American tribes in colder climates subsist exclusively by hunting and gathering, most tribes also have some sort of agriculture. Tribes, especially in the North, did exclusive hunting and gathering, but most Native American tribes had agriculture for at least part of their food supply. They would be nomadic if they were hunter gatherers, but tribes that relied on agriculture had permanent settlements. And those permanent settlements were on water because you need water in order to live. Okay, so definitely differences amongst them. That brings us into contact. Okay. Now, why did they come? We know they came for three big reasons. We talk about the three G's. They came for gold, glory, or God. Yes, there are definitely groups of people who came because they believed in the idea of converting the natives. But obviously, we know the main reason that many came had more to do with that gold and glory. So keep that in mind. But all three are a good argument as to why groups came. They began because they're looking for a trade route for Asia. Now we know they bump around Africa first to start. They are going to try to get there because of some new discoveries. Prince Henry the Navigator helps lead this, but they end up discovering or using things like the astrolabe, the magnetic compass, new ships like the caravel. They develop a lateen sail. They have a stern post rudder, and this allows them to navigate safely, which allows them to go further and further. When we see this final contact, this reaching of this new world to them, we also see something called the Columbian Exchange begin. And you can see right there, I have an image of that, of goods coming from the Americas to the Old World and goods coming from the Old World to the Americas. Understand the Old World is Europe, the Old World is Africa. The Old World also can be Asia, though, because of those trade routes. You had sand, you had sea, and you had silk that was happening before that. And it allows the Europeans to have quite a bit of interaction with the African population and with the Asian population long before they met the New World. I wanted to give you some very good examples of some of those things that were traded. So we know that people, disease, food, groups, all those things traded. Horses. When you take a look at horses that come, that changes the way Native Americans live in the New World. Also, smallpox, when that comes from Old World to New, that's going to decimate Native American populations even more so than the trouble, the warfare that's going to happen. From the New World to the Old World, the introduction of maize and potatoes allows population growth to happen in significant numbers. And it's going to fuel that population growth in Europe. And then, obviously, one of the most destructive things that comes out of this, besides smallpox, is the slave trade. 4/5 of the people who are brought over in the Columbian Exchange are brought as chattel bondage. So it's important to remember that. So this is a give and take relationship, and you have to understand that it goes both ways. Now let's look specifically at Spain and Portugal at this point. England's not on scene yet. This is the groups we're going to talk about. Spain and Portugal, with the help of the Pope, do agree to divide up the Western Hemisphere with the Treaty of Tordesillas. The West is given to Spain, the East is given to Portugal, and Spain establishes that first permanent settlement in the United States today in St. Augustine in 1565. Now, they do so with something they call the encomienda system. This is a form of native slave labor, for instance, in mining, the mining of silver, or in agriculture, specifically sugar. It's very harsh. It's also very efficient for the Spanish. They also do work hard to convert the natives to Catholicism. This is a very different goal than what we see with the English and what the English do. They also intermix way more than the English will. The English do not intermix with the Native American groups or the slaves. We will see the Spanish do so, and it creates different groups of people, almost like a caste system. So you'll have the mestizo, which are the people who are Indian and European, and you have the mulatto, the people who are white and black. The Spanish do attempt to change Native American beliefs. That's going to lead to conflict. One of the best examples of conflict that I can speak to you about is in 1680, Pueblo's Revolt or Pope's Rebellion. Same exact concept called, same exact thing, just called two different words. This led to the deaths of hundreds of Spanish colonists and the destruction of Catholic churches in the area. And it shows the Native people were willing to fight to maintain their political and cultural autonomy. It also is a great example that Native Americans didn't just sit around and try to let this happen to them. They obviously fought back. When the Spanish do return, they take the area back over in 1692, then the Spanish are forced to allow some accommodations so the natives win in some way. And then finally, the last big topic is you have to understand there is fighting over how the natives should be treated. And the two best examples that we have for that is by Juan de Sepulveda and Bartolomé de las Casas. And I have seen a short answer where primary sources were given by these two men, and you had to compare and contrast these. So there are debates. Obviously, so Sepulveda says he writes his just causes for war against Indians And he justifies the Spanish colonization of the Americas. He says it's a good thing that we're here. De las Casas, on the other hand, in 1552, writes a short account of the destruction of the Indies, where he criticizes the Spanish treatment of the indigenous people. So, in this Unit 1, can you do the following? Can you discuss Native American life, how they're the same and how they're different? Can you talk about the Columbian Exchange? Can you discuss the Treaty of Tordesillas? Can you discuss the encomienda system? Can you discuss what mestizo is, Pueblo's revolt, the arguments between Sepulveda and De las Casas, and can you begin to discuss mercantilism? We will discuss that more, though, in Unit 2. Finally, I always like to end this with 2 or 3 questions. If you had to write about this, could you write about this? What were the effects of the transatlantic trade on the development of the North American economy 1491 to 1607? And what effect did the clash of cultures in North America have on the Europeans, on the Native Americans, and on the Africans? All right, guys, that brings us to the end of Unit 1. So make sure you're studying and good luck.